All right, this is from the Diamond Sutra. Subhuti, if a son or daughter of good family receives, memorizes, recites, and masters this sutra, and then explains it to others, they will be despised and scorned. Why? Because of the negative karma of their past lives. But by enduring others' scorn, they will extinguish their past negative karma and attain the enlightenment of a Buddha. So, again, good evening and welcome to those of you joining the Ocean Mind Sangha for the first time, this ocean gathering of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, of noble friends who I think is fair to say share a sincere wish to be and to stay awake, to bring a little bit of light into the world, a bit of goodness, or rather to share and multiply the goodness that is always there, to let it be unobstructed. Many of you know I love words, I love language, and I love the power that language has to shape our understanding, to shape our world, really. And I have great respect, for that power. And so, just take this word, unobstructed. There are a number of Buddhist terms that use this prefix, un. Right? The unborn, the unconditioned, the unfabricated, the unchanging, the unbinding. And these terms are compelling, to me at least, because they connote not simply the negation of a state, but also its unmaking. So something is unfabricated, for example, is not that it's just real or it's genuine or spontaneous, but in a Buddhist sense, it's also not created. By whom? By what? By me, by my mind, or by anybody else's mind. Sonkai referred to this last week when he said, and I'm paraphrasing him, but he said something like, the world is the mind. We're creating our lives with our mind. And I said, yes, this is very much a Buddhist understanding. But when something is unfabricated, this implies that it's in a state in which it can exist of itself, by itself. It doesn't need me to meddle with it. It doesn't need me to make it into what it is. So it's not affected by my ideas, my opinions, my judgments, my desires. And isn't that wonderful? In a world where we see desire and its effects so clearly. So something that is unfabricated is authentic through and through, true to nothing but itself, just like every single one of us, although we might not know it. So unobstructed goodness permeates everything. Well, kind of like a drop of ink in water. Our role is to be the water. And now this passage from the Diamond Sutra, which also deals with a number of words and concepts, we touched on during our brief study of the Vajracharika Sutta, the diamond that cuts through illusion. This was our text for Ango. So twice a year in the Ocean Mind Sangha, we do a 30-day training intensive. And we just finished this last week, a week and a half ago. and this was our text, a central Mahayana text that is very important in Zen, particularly because it's teachings on emptiness and impermanence. And I brought up this passage and I said that it's actually a koan that students in our lineage take up as part of koan training. So they take it up as a question. You know, how is it that my suffering now wipes out my past harmful karma? And I left it as homework, actually, for all of us to sit with and contemplate, because the teaching that it offers is both profound and, I believe, provocative. And I looked at a number of translations, and they're all very awkwardly worded. I mean, maybe the original construction was awkward too. So they're very wordy and a little difficult to understand. So what I read is a little bit of a paraphrase, but the meaning is the same. So the Buddha is essentially telling Subhuti, one of his most prominent students, that those who study the sutra and share it with others will be scorned, will be reviled. And then he's like, why? Because they've done something in a past life. We don't know what. It was something that caused harm. And as a result, now they are being harmed in turn. But, the Buddha adds, by enduring that scorn, by bearing that scorn, that person's negative karma will be extinguished. And they'll attain enlightenment. They'll gain freedom, essentially. So he's really saying, you know, you're suffering now because of something you did in the past. But don't worry, because your suffering now will clear that past negative karma and you will be free. I mean, that's quite a statement. It's quite a statement if you think about it. And the thing is, the way karma works, it doesn't just apply from life to life. You know that many of the teachings, if not all the teachings of Buddhism, are meant to be understood in the context of multiple lives. It's an understanding that there is a kind of continuity from one life to the next. And it is a classical teaching that if you are suffering in this life, it is because of something that you did in a past life. And I have said in the past that, you know, for us in our Western society, this teaching is not exactly comforting, because we tend to turn it inward and it becomes victim blaming. So if I have an illness, if I have misfortune, if I am, you know, living in a country that is at war, that must mean I did something in the past and now I'm paying for it. But actually in Eastern countries, or in Buddhist countries, there is an element of making sense of why things happen the way they do. Why is it that bad things happen to good people, for example? I think it is an attempt, you know, of our tradition to try to explain why things happen the way that they do. But it's also a tricky teaching. You know, I think it's potentially dangerous even, because it can turn into victim blaming. You know, you were bad and now you're paying for it. Or because it can mislead us into thinking, well, then I don't really have to do anything. I did something bad. I don't have to atone for it, take responsibility. I don't have to repair the harm that I've caused. And neither, of course, is what the Buddha was referring to. Neither is true. Buddhism is not a guilt-driven religion. No, it's really very practical. It's very down to earth. And this teaching that my present suffering is due to past karma as I said, is one way to make sense of why things happen the way they do in what sometimes seems to be a very unjust world. But I believe, much more importantly, it's a way to speak about the power of our actions, about their reach. Because we're used to thinking linearly. I do something, and in the next moment, it has an effect. And this koan, this passage, is saying differently. It's saying, I do something now, and it has an effect in every direction. It has an effect in this moment, the next, and the previous one, all at once. Excuse me. That is why this is a koan. That's why it's an important Dharma teaching, I feel, and not just a moral injunction. You know, be aware of your actions so you don't suffer the consequences. I mean, that's important to keep a society running, you know, to keep a group or individuals in line. But that's not liberation. That's not awakening. And so, what is the Buddha really saying? Every action, every moment, every thought, every word radiates in every direction. And so what we do now certainly has the power to affect the future, but it also has the power to affect the past. That is why what we do, what we say, what we think matters. That's why it matters so much. You know, in one sense, it's comforting to believe that when we act, that our actions are contained, are limited. You know, they're just affecting me. Maybe they're just affecting a few people around me. It's harder to appreciate that they really are like that drop of ink. And that often we don't have an accurate way or precise way of knowing exactly what the reach is. And so my teacher used to say, just assume that it reaches. Assume that the reach is much, much greater than you think, and act accordingly. You know, and that can feel heavy. It can feel big. But I think it's also excellent news, because it means that it's never too late to make amends, to make a wiser choice, to know our power, and to wield it skillfully. You know, and I was thinking as I was sitting, I was reminded of, you know, moments when I have been in the presence of someone who was really good at what they do. You know, somebody who sings in such a way that it really moves you, or an athlete that makes their discipline, their sport look easy. And I was wondering, you know, what is it about that that is sometimes so compelling, that is so attractive? You know, like you see the kind of like the really regular guy on the street, you know, who looks like he could be, you know, an accountant or something. And then he goes on one of those singing contest shows, and he opens his mouth, and it turns out he has this incredible baritone. And something about it moves you. And I wonder if it's because of that sense that we have, that we can be fully who we are, be fully in alive, nothing left out. That when we see that in someone, in whatever field, we might see it, that we recognize something. Oh, I too am capable of that. Human beings are capable of this. And so perhaps I too am capable. And maybe we don't even think about it, but I think there's a recognition. Like somebody who inhabits completely, the place where they are, the place where they stand. And then I was thinking, it doesn't even have to be, oh, excuse me for a second. I forgot to turn this on. It doesn't even have to be somebody who's um, a master what they do. Somebody famous, for example. Because I remember feeling the same thing. I've told this story before, many, many years ago, when my brother died. There was in the next town over from the monastery, which was really just the main street. It was a tiny little town. The funeral home was run by a family. And the person who was in charge, the funeral director, essentially, it was this guy who was essentially made for that job. I mean, if you're going to have the misfortune of somebody that you love dying, especially unexpectedly, he was the guy you wanted to take care of it, because he made it feel, first of all, very natural, very graceful, the whole process, but he made me feel completely taken care of. And I know that is their job, and that many of them are trained, well, that they're all trained, to do this. But he really was one of those people who was just, yeah, it felt like he was made for that. And all these years later, I mean, it's been almost 20 years. I still remember my interactions with him. And so that's what I mean, by power. It's not even anything necessarily dramatic. It is that we're fully who we are. We're fully ourselves. And in a way, this is what this koan, this passage, is pointing to. I've been reading this book about plants and plant consciousness, plant intelligence. And, it's all the rage now. It has been for some years, the question of whether plants are conscious, intelligent, whether they can make decisions. And we understand that they don't have brains or nervous systems the way that animals do. They don't have neurons. And yet, there are studies that show quite clearly that they can hear, in a sense. I mean, they can sense vibration, that they can count, or up to a certain point, keep time, that they can remember. And so the author of this book, Zoe Schlanger, was asking the question, I mean, could it be that, yes, they don't have a localized brain, but could it be that the whole plant is a brain? One plant, which is a kind of cress, essentially, can hear when a caterpillar is eating its leaves and send out a chemical to detract it. Venus flytraps, I mean, they can both sense, when there's a fly in their trap, but they can distinguish, the way that they distinguish whether it's a fly or a bit of dust or a piece of a branch or something, apparently, is that they count. If there's a stimulus, they're little hairs that actually cause the trap to close. If they're stimulated at least twice within 20 seconds, then they sense, oh, there's something there, something trapped. It's not just a speck of dust. But, and so the trap closes. But if then the stimulus stops, it will open up again. I will know, oh, I made a mistake. Garlic remembers spring and patiently waits out the winter before sprouting. And so this question, could it be that the whole plant is a brain? Some scientists will say yes. Not very loudly, because in the 90s, they were really debunked. This book, The Secret Life of Plants, was really debunked. But some of them would say they seem to have a sort of awareness. Well, our own version of this question could it be that the whole world is mind? That the whole world knows and cognizes in ways much more varied and much more strange than the ones we know, than the ones we recognize. And so the argument against plant or animal intelligence, that we anthropomorphize, the implication of that is that we're at the center, and other creatures, other beings, might be made in our own image. But what if it's not like that at all? What if it turns out that we are like plants? That being so much closer than we think, we're like each other. That pebbles and puppies and roses and radios, remember those? Are all expressions of this mind. And so is space and time. The whole thing, nothing but mind. What do we do with that? Well, pay attention for one, choose well for another, choose skillfully. And that's not a bad way to summarize the teachings of the Buddha Dharma, to pay attention and to choose skillfully. In the Kusala Sutta, the Buddha said, abandon what is unskillful and cultivate the good. And then, as if anticipating that some of his students might protest, he said, it is possible to abandon the unskillful and to cultivate the good. If it weren't possible, I wouldn't tell you to do it. If it were harmful or painful, I wouldn't tell you to do it. It's because abandoning what is unskillful and cultivating the good will lead to happiness and pleasure that I ask you to do it. I think that's such a wonderful teaching. It's such a human teaching. Because, maybe as he's speaking, the Buddha senses that his monks need that reassurance. Maybe some of them have been complaining. You're really telling me to practice loving kindness for everyone? What if their actions are hateful? I've been hearing a version of this lately. Isn't it disingenuous to be kind in that case? Isn't it naive? And I think it's interesting when people sometimes characterize Buddhism as soft, as a little kind of crunchy, like granola crunchy. Like, wearing sandals with socks or something hippie-ish, and therefore just a little vague, maybe a little ineffective. Because I think it's really one of the most rigorous, most precise ways of engaging your mind, engaging your body, engaging the world. And maybe some of the Buddha's monks knew that. What is going to be asked of me? Do I really need to let go of all of these thoughts to sit here without moving and focus on the breath? Will this really be good for me, ultimately? Because it doesn't always feel good now. Let me just make that clear. But remember Sonat, the lute player? He was a lute player before he became a monk. And then he became ordained. He left home and decides he's young and he's very sincere and very enthusiastic. And so he goes off on a solo retreat and is doing walking meditation back and forth from the path from his cabin, to the woods. And he's been walking for so long that he gets blisters on his feet, the bottoms of his feet. And, he starts bleeding. And so at one point he sits down on a tree trunk and he thinks, I mean, is this really the right way? This is really hard. I'm away from my family. I don't really get to see them. I could just go back. I could go back. They would love it. I could give alms to the monks. I could help to build stupas. Those are other ways of making merit. Does it really have to be this hard? And the Buddha reads his mind and appears before him and says, so now, what were you doing before you became a monk? Oh, were you thinking about leaving? He's like, well, yeah. Well, what were you doing before you became a monk? I was a lute player. What happened when you tightened the strings of your lute too much? Well, they would break. What happened if you didn't tighten them enough? Then the lute wouldn't play. And the Buddha says, that's right. You have to set the pitch of your persistence, he said. Tighten them just enough. And there, pick up your theme, he says. So, there might have been monastics who were, or just any of us, who doubt at a certain point. Is this the best thing I could be doing right now? Is this the best use of my time, of my mind, of my attention, my energy? There are other ways to make merit. There are other ways to make a difference in the world. Definitely. And sitting sometimes is just boring, or it's hard, or it's confrontive, it's overwhelming. Is this really what I should be doing? And the teacher says, no, it is good for you. It's actually one of the most skillful things that you can do. And all these people have done it before you, which means you can do it too. And if you just stay with it, you'll be able to reap the benefits. But you do have to be willing to let go. Of what? Of your need to know, the need to be right, the need to pin down, to measure, to categorize. Because all of those just get in the way. They get in the way of the unobstructed, of that bright, luminous, cognizant mind. Our mind. Oh, I don't know. And then there's doubt. Sharon Salzberg speaks of doubt, that type of doubt, as walk-away doubt. And she tells the story of the Buddha's enlightenment. He spent 49 days near the Bodhi tree where he awakened, and afterwards is walking toward a village. And she says, you can just imagine, his radiance. He has just seen into everybody's past lives. He has seen Four Noble Truths. He has seen interdependence. And so he's just walking towards a village, maybe to get some food, and a merchant sees him, and he's struck. He's struck by the Buddha's radiance. And so he says, who are you? What are you? Are you a god? Are you a deva, a celestial being? And the Buddha says to him, famously says to him, I am awake. And I didn't know this part of the story, but Sharon Salzberg says, the merchant just looks at him and says, yeah, maybe, and walks away. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that merchant a few years later just kicking himself for that lost opportunity? Yeah, maybe there's such a thing as enlightenment. Nah, not for me. Maybe there's such a thing as lasting peace, but it's not here. It's not now. Maybe I can quiet my mind if I do this or that. And there's no one stopping us. No one stopping us but ourselves, that running story in our minds. Not me, not this, not now. This is the importance of faith, a very particular kind of faith. Since it's not a faith in a higher power. I was running the other day with one of my blind running partners. I've now run with a few different ones, and they're so unique, each of them in their own ways. And this woman is a mother of two, maybe about 10 years younger than me, and recently very religious after the death of her mother. And so at one point in our run, and I don't even remember what prompted this, because she talks constantly, basically, without pause, just to breathe. And she said to me at one point, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Quoting the Christian definition of faith. And it made me think of what I have said before, which is that I believe in Buddhism, we could say that faith is the substance of things recognized and the evidence of things not yet seen. So in other words, we have a sense of something and we move toward it. This is what sets us on the path. We sense something beyond our sight, something that is possible, though at the moment out of reach. But we direct ourselves toward it, perhaps with the help of those who've gone before us, a sangha, a teacher. And over time, what we come to see with a bit of work, a bit of practice, is not another world, but this world, newly radiant. Not some mysterious, transcendent teaching, but our ordinary life, now writ large and somehow extraordinary. Preparing a meal, we now realize, is in fact a sacred activity. Walking the dog, listening to a conversation. And all of it because our seeing is now unobstructed. We don't know in the beginning that that is what's going to happen. And so we have to trust something that we haven't yet seen. And the question remains, but how do we go from seeing, from not seeing to seeing? How do we go from thinking what I do now affects what happens next to what is happening now is everything. It's all there is. And the answer is actually quite simple. Embarrassingly so. We have to get out of our own way. I mean, that's it. That's it. I mean, that's all there is to it, which is a lot. But that's all it is, because it's the I that gets in the way. And so faith for us is trusting that we don't have to be in the middle of everything. The I doesn't have to manage and control, direct and evaluate. Is the trust that if we can let go even a little, what we see is a wisdom that goes far beyond what we can measure or explain. And so when we take our seats, we turn that light around, we let go of a thought. It's not because there's anything wrong with thought, but because in the space before and in the space after and in the space under and beyond thought, there is a wisdom that we cannot access through thinking, through reasoning. Artists know this. Mystics know this. Buddhists know this. And we know it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. And so when we doubt, when the teachings seem obscure or distant, maybe we can just open that hand of thought and trust a little bit that wisdom. Because it's, perfectly natural to doubt. And up to a point, it's healthy. But we don't have to let ourselves be stopped by it. And we definitely don't have to let it make us walk away. This is Rilke in his letters to a young poet. You must not be frightened if a sadness rises in front of you, larger than any you have ever seen. If an anxiety, like a light in cloud shadows, moves over your hands and over everything you do, you must realize that something is happening to you, that life has not forgotten you, that it holds you in its hand and will not let you fall. May we always know that.